I am here with Sarah, who is the Modern Nanny on Instagram. And we are going to be having a conversation today a little bit about Sarah and her experience and, kind of learn a little bit about what she's been doing and how she sets up her families to really hone in on what's the best fit for her, boundaries, and how she sort of determined how to get to this point that she's at now. Anyway, Sarah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about where you're from, your journey, and how you got to be where you are now.
So I got started in childcare at large as a respite provider when I was in college. So I was providing respite for families with special needs, some pretty um, some pretty large needs, and so I was supporting them. I decided to pursue behavioral therapy, and I was supporting families in that way. But I felt like I was really held back by a lot of the just like systems in place. There was a lot of needs that I could see for this family that they really needed support, but I really couldn't provide it for them because of the position that I was in. Um, and so I decided to pursue nannying as a way to be more intentional with my care instead of bouncing from family to family, and really not actually being able to support, being right on the edge of supporting them in the way that they needed to be. So I decided to pursue nannying so I could really hone in on one family, um, and really support them in whatever ways that they needed to. But in that, I was super, super eager to help, really wanting to lean into that people pleasing. And so I poured myself into that position full fledged to the point that I became incredibly burnt out, had no boundaries, was like kind of just a walking around, walking on fumes, like just was not who I wanted to be. Living pretty inauthentically, no boundaries, just fully in service. And while that was exactly what I wanted to do, at the same time, that was then preventing me from being able to support them in the way that I wanted to. So the behavioral therapy, while those systems in place kind of prevented me from providing that support, at the same time, those provided some boundaries that I really didn't have in the nanny world that I needed to learn and implement backwards. Um, so I learned a lot about boundaries and how they would support me in my role and supporting the family too. I think a lot of times we think of boundaries as these really harsh, like, no way, Jose, to the family. And there's not ways that we can be still flexible and empathetic and practicing in our compassion with our boundaries. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. In 2020, I decided to make my Instagram, The Modern Nanny, really as just a way to seek camaraderie, to seek other nannies in the industry. I didn't mention this, but I got started in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley specifically, where everybody kind of has domestic helpers. Every household, some of them are fully staffed, but everybody kind of has a helper. But we were kind of all navigating with blinders on. Like nobody really talked to each other. Nobody really. Everyone was like in their own home, their own little bubble. But there wasn't a whole lot of community outside of it, and so I would get so frustrated because I'd walk outside and I'd see a nanny at that house, a nanny at that house, a nanny at that house. We're all walking to the same school with our kiddos, but not in community with each other. And so, um,
Why do you think that is? Why do you think, you guys are all surrounded by each other? Is it the environment that was like, ooh, no, we stay focused and we don't communicate? Or like, why didn't everybody sort of talk to each other?
yeah, I think there's this like idea that to fully support that family is to just fully support that family. And it's not very village mindset, not very community mindset, very individualized. And so, even in those communities, there's a lot of like, don't share my secrets, don't tell other people what's going on. And there's a misunderstanding of what conversations and what communications those nannies would actually be having. I think there's this idea that they're gonna just be catty or gossip about the families or get make things really messy and muddy. But in that, we were missing out on a lot of those like really crucial um, community happenings. We were all going through COVID at the same time. We were all doing our homeschooling with our kiddos. We were all doing like reinventing what our jobs were, but we were not discussing it. We weren't talking about it as a community. Um, and I think that was really, really missing from our industry. And so in 2020, I kind of just put myself out there on Instagram, and the community came in droves, which means that it was so necessary. It was not just me, which is kind of the problem that I first was going through. Was like, this is only me. I'm the only one working every other weekend. I'm the only one working months and it at a time. I'm the only one experiencing these like real raw emotions of people and not knowing how to regulate them for themselves or for myself.
Do you find too that it was because of where you, okay, so you were in Silicon Valley, which obviously I would assume that most families are like, here's an NDA, like, don't be saying anything to anybody. And maybe that's why you sort of felt sort of sheltered in that way. When you started the Modern Nanny on Instagram and you had all these nannies reaching out to you, did these nannies come from like everywhere, or was it specific areas? And then how did you, you know, I guess do all of you kind of talk, and how does that work on your Instagram with this big platform that you've built now?
It's funny because at first I was in this like just Silicon Valley minded, like where it's just me, and then kind of once people started to um, connect with me, I was realizing, oh, it's not just me, it's like the Silicon Valley. And then even more like, oh my gosh, it's not just me, it's like all of California. And then, oh my gosh, it's not just all of California, it's all of the United States. Oh my gosh, it's not just all of the, like, and it really, once we started talking about these just experiences that we have, and it's not necessarily like these large overarching conversations. A lot of us are already in the job, and they're very small little things that we experience that we really needed to work through because we kind of hold on to them, and then we're working with a family for 3 years holding on to this like little resentment that we had from like year one that we never really addressed, never really took care of. And then now we're trying to find a new family, and we're like kind of navigating this like wound that we never fixed. And yeah.
And I tell people all the time too, when I talk to families and I talk to nannies, I'm like, it's like a marriage. You have to talk, you have to communicate. And there are going to be things, let's say when you're married, that, there are things that your husband does that drive you crazy. And you're like, ugh, and then just festers and boils up, and then you yell at each other, and it's okay because you're married and that's just the way it works. But when you're a nanny, it's kind of that same where you're in such an intimate environment that little things like that you're really not supposed to be talking about or not supposed to be saying because you're the nanny. But I think that having these conversations, like you starting your Instagram, have these conversations about, let's start it off right so that we don't have these things fester and we get so angry that first year, and then you're in year 3 and you're like, ugh, now it's like way past the point. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and then you're thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't even be in this career. Maybe I need to change careers entirely because the last 3 years were kind of a wash, or like not really knowing like how do I reset that into the next one so that I don't perpetuate these things that are not even authentic to ourselves. I think a lot of the times we make up these rules or these parameters or these things that because we have this idea that it is supportive of them, but in the end it's not, because it's not supportive of us either. And so I like to ask nannies like, is that like care that you would want to have where somebody's like helping you half-heartedly or helping you out like with this resentment boiling, with this frustration boiling? And the answer is usually no, we wouldn't want that. And so like kind of navigating that and really creating the boundaries so that they are supportive of you and of the family, because we are such empathetic people, such compassionate people, but it's usually outward facing first before we show the empathy and compassion to ourselves. But that's really where it needs to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were working for a family in Silicon Valley, and you worked for them for how many years?
Ooh, let's see. I am still kind of doing some family assistant work for them. But I would say I was with them for a good 7 years, 6 or 7 years.
Okay, perfect. And how did you, in that role, because I'm assuming here, just based on when you created the Modern Nanny and have kind of gained this community, how did you go from the beginning of that during COVID and then resetting your boundaries? So, where you were able to stand up and say, okay, listen, I actually have something to say here, and this can make this environment way better. So, how did you navigate that and then execute that?
It was not the funnest, I have to admit. There were a lot of like really icky conversations, a really lot of icky looking at myself in the mirror first before I had those conversations with the family. Because I think even when we start to have those conversations, we kind of provide a lot of like explanation that's like not really necessary, but it is necessary when we're talking to ourselves. When we're talking to ourselves, when we're talking with our colleagues, when we're talking with our coworkers, those things need to be said and they need to be rustled through before we come to our families and our bosses and explaining it to them that way, because it is such an intimate role that like immediately their response isn't like, oh my gosh, everything, it's like everything is falling apart, what do we do, we need to fix it, when really it's like kind of just starting with our conversation, starting with our values, kind of getting back to that, taking a look at what we're doing, what doesn't feel right, and figuring out why. A lot of the times it's because we are really honing into a value that isn't the value that we should be, that we're wanting to seek. Sometimes we think that we are having the value of like community and support, but what we're really doing is seeking the value of just like pleasing one person, and not taking a wider look at how it supports the whole people, the whole community, the whole family, the whole village, all of it. Um, so essentially, it was a lot of inner work at first, a lot of journaling, a lot of connecting with other people, kind of asking perspective, getting our thoughts out of our head where we kind of placate ourselves or we give ourselves the answers that are like not the right ones. We're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just do it this way and that'll fix it. But if we were to actually say it out loud to another person that cared about us compassionately and empathetically, they would tell us, no way, don't do that. So, really acting as if I'm talking to another person and not just me. And sometimes that requires talking to an actual another person, so that they can kind of reorient, soundboard for you. Um, and then yeah, having those hard conversations, and it is really scary at first, but I've come to realize that once the nanny starts setting their boundaries, once they start walking in their own empathy, compassion, and what that really looks like, the family catches on pretty quick, and the family really realizes like, oh, when one person is operating in this way, like we can too, and it kind of gives them the permission. Many times like the nanny is operating that way, operating at like a high capacity, high stress because the family is, and we think we need to just like keep up with it, as opposed to reshifting for them and like really walking in it and giving an example of them of what a good work-life balance can look like, what good boundaries can look like. Um, and once parents see that a nanny can do that, many times they're like, oh, I can do that too. If this person is coming into my home and setting those boundaries and they look good, they feel good, they're not like hurting me, then we recognize that like, oh, I can set those boundaries too with my job, with my friends, with my whatever. And it's so cool.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes when so obviously we match people together, but sometimes when we match people together, we it depends on families' personalities, right? And on nannies' personalities. So that if there's a really high strung family, they're intense, they have a lot going on, it's important to know as a nanny or a family that maybe finding someone that's just like you is just not the best fit. Like that doesn't fit into the puzzle piece where you're like, oh my gosh, my personality is fun and I'm outgoing, I'm crazy, and I'm like 100 miles an hour. Then that's not someone that you want in that situation. And as a nanny, you don't want to be in that situation either, because it's like a hamster wheel. You're like continually just doing what the family is doing, and it's not helping anybody. But I think just based on what you're saying, finding those boundaries and to have some self-awareness too, of knowing who you are and what your style is, to go into a home and be able to say, okay, well, I see this going on, and I think I can do this, this, and this to help this family along so that we can grow together in a way that is cohesive, but also a family unit of calm. Because I think most parents and most nannies would love an atmosphere of some calmness to where, things are running really, really smoothly. What do you think about, so if you were to give top three best setting boundaries. So what are your top three boundaries that you would recommend for nannies to know before even going into an interview or starting their job search for the first time or again, where, because there's a lot of situations where nannies come out of a family that they're like, that was just not healthy, that was not good. So what are your top three tips that you recommend to set those boundaries before they take on a position?
I'd say one major one is just the entire world of communication, like really figuring out what your preferred communication style is, what your preferred, like what supports you in communication. If it is like sitting down once a month to really hash out details, if it is having a like written log where we just kind of connect over DM, if it's like whatever your like best way to communicate what feels supportive to you, really nail down what that is. I guess another one would be around self-care. How would you really put self-care at like kind of the center of your work, whether it's on the job or off the job, like kind of implementing that into your daily life, self-care on the job, working through those self-care stuff, giving that an example to those children and to the family of what self-care looks like. um, I'm trying, that's a, because boundaries are so interesting because they are so individualized, like they are very, very specific to who you are. And so that's why I'm like kind of giving these umbrella categories of like, communication is a good one. Self-care is a good one. I'm trying to think.
I think too, being, and this kind of goes along with communication, but just being your own advocate too, where you're like, you know what, no, and maybe community is another one where it's like, I want to have these conversations with people in my community to know what standard, because what you don't want to do it as a nanny is to walk into a situation and just settle. And so you're like, okay, you want to offer me $22 an hour, but like having a community and knowing that that's too low is, I think, boundaries just kind of within yourself as a nanny to know what your value is and to know that you don't need to do that, because that's just not what the industry standards are.
Say that's a huge one too. Yeah, creating a community around you, to kind of just give you that perspective. Because there's oftentimes in our work, it's usually not these like big hiccup things, but they're kind of like small little details that kind of like rub us wrong, or we're not sure if we're reading that correctly. And having a community to kind of just hear your perspective and kind of shed theirs on it, is so, so invaluable, because sometimes all it takes is that somebody saying like, oh yeah, you're right, that did kind of sound a little weird, but knowing the situation, it's probably more likely this than that, is so invaluable, because then you can kind of work through that without having to disturb the actual like stuff, because many times we get so overwhelmed and so scared that we're like, oh, I'm just gonna leave, I'm just gonna, like, this is it, I'm gonna quit, like that's it. As opposed to just working through it, working through it, figuring out what it is, what value of yours that is it's not meeting, to kind of navigate it and fix it.
What would you say? I'm thinking about this, but what would you say your, I don't know, I'm just going with this top three notion here, but what are your top three, like, non-negotiable, what would quit a job? Like, if any of these top three things came up, you'd be like, nope, I'm out.
That's so hard because I have been like in spaces where it's like I won't quit for anything. Like I've been in spaces where it's like, oh, they could do anything to me and I would not quit because like that's just who I am. I'm a very caring person. I'm willing to bend over backwards. I'm willing to just be what at your disposal and do whatever you want. So I guess now looking back, it would be anything that really made me feel like I couldn't be myself anymore. There was a lot of instances where I just felt like I had to be somebody else because that's who they wanted it to be. And so positions that would make me compromise my own values and who I am and who I've learned to be would be a non-negotiable for me now. Um, One that is like toxic, obviously, like one that they're yelling at you, one that they're demeaning to you. Those are non-negotiables, and ones that are not willing to kind of hear your perspective. Sometimes there are families that you realize right away that it's not one that is a workable relationship. It's one where they kind of just want you to do what they say, do what it is, and that's just not for me. That might be for somebody else. It might have been for me 5 years ago, but it's not for me anymore. Um, I really like to work with a family and have them respect me as an individual first. I like to say human first, nanny second. So any family that can recognize me as a human first is one that I want to be with, whether it, even if it is a little icky. I'd rather be with that family than one that doesn't respect me as an individual first.
What would your advice be? Because this, I run into this all the time, and I'm just curious at your thoughts on the topic. What would your advice be if someone came to you, or if you were in this situation where you were in kind of a toxic environment with the family, and let's say you've been with this family for a couple of years, and you just love those kids so much, because this happens all the time. What would your advice be to somebody who's in that kind of situation where they're like, Sarah, I'm working with this family. I've been with them for 3 years. I've been with them since they had a 1-year-old and then had another baby. So, like, I know them through and through. I'm being treated this way. I can't get out of it. I tried communication. What do I do?
Oh, so hard. Just like you said earlier, with it's kind of like a marriage. With our kids, sometimes it can kind of be that way too, where it's like we're staying in it for the kids. We just like love the kids so much that we're just gonna like keep pushing through. Um, and I love that empathy and that compassion, but at the same time, recognizing that that child still deserves a caregiver team that is fully functioning. That child deserves like nannies that are working alongside their parents. And if those parents aren't going to work alongside you, then that child deserves somebody else to work alongside their parents and have that full cohesive team for themselves, and kind of just taking a look at that and what role you're playing in that team. And it might not be your time for it anymore. You might have to leave the team because you have to look at the bigger picture for that child, and that child deserves that. And that's really what it comes down to, is we're like, I love that child so much that I don't want to give up on them. It's really not giving up on them. It's actually providing them the support that they needed the entire time.
And that's where you see a lot of nanny turnover, I think, too, where, just as much as nannies, when I interview nannies and they're like, oh, I've been with 7 families this past year, it's like, oh, that's a red flag. But even with families, when I see families that have had so much turnover, I'm like, let's get to the bottom of why. Like, really, why? And then there's, of course, their version of why, and then there's the reality of why. But that can be difficult at times. And I know for myself, when I have nannies in this situation, I'm like, you do you first. Like, you need to be happy. You need to be going to work, feeling good about going to work. And if you're in a state of panic every morning when you're on your way to work, that is not good for yourself. And take care of yourself. And then, the kids' needs and then the families, and trying to get on the same page is important. But I think one thing in what you're saying is having all these things in place before you even start interviewing, and knowing these things will just make your relationship so much more successful.
And you know what you're about. I think that's a big part of it is when you're like kind of working, like just following their lead can kind of hurt you in the long run because you don't really know what you're about anymore. Like you should have your own purpose statement, your own personal statement about what you're doing as a nanny. Instead of just kind of like, oh, I wash the dishes for this family, I do laundry for this family, I whatever. What is your personal statement as a nanny? What are you doing? And what is it all for? Um, and once you, yeah, and once you kind of like leave from that, once you start to veer away from understanding what your own value is and what your own personal statement is, then you kind of need to course correct. And that should be your sign of course correcting. Is like, oh, am I not walking in my own authenticity?
Okay, so switching topics a little bit. Well, you've been, I feel like, coaching this whole time that we've been talking, but tell me a little bit about your coaching side of things.
It's kind of just like this, honestly. My intensives, because we don't have those stereotypical coworkers to kind of soundboard to go through those things, my coaching is kind of just that. I provide an opportunity for nannies to have a coworker in me, to have a soundboarding in me, to have a whatever they need it to be. Some people like I offer it to be recorded because some people are like, yeah, I really want to watch this back. I'm basically blacked out this entire call and I want to watch it. And other people are like, no, don't record me. I want this to be a vent session. Like, don't write down the things that I said. Yeah, and so it's really cool to offer that as like a resource because that's really all I needed. When I created the Instagram, it was really just so I could have a space for that, a space that I could dedicate to my co-working, to my colleagues, to figuring out what that is. And so I offer that as a service to nannies in my coaching so they can have that, as well as I have a little cohort of coworkers that people can join into that too so they can just kind of ask the questions if like something's going on in the day where you're like, I don't know, I'm feeling a little weird, the wake windows aren't adding up and I'm feeling a little pressure with work from home dad being here. Can I ask some perspective, some feedback? What would you guys do? And that's such like a invaluable lesson for them because they can have that without disrupting the entire house and without asking dad like, I don't know what I'm doing, work from home is really hard for me, I don't know. But still having those feelings in a productive, constructive space where other people can support you and encourage you through that.
Well, and that's exactly right too. Having those because you don't have coworkers, and it is to find this community is such an amazing thing because you're alone a lot as a nanny and you're trying to figure it out. And as you know, every family is so different, and so you're kind of like winging it a little bit and not really sure, but to be able to ask questions and or go through your coaching and kind of just be like, oh, okay, well, this is standard, or oh, I'm not crazy, this is what people are doing too. And then I think it makes you come back a better nanny. I mean, because then it's like, I have this community and I know now what's going on. Here's what I can bring to this family based on, hearing all these other people in the same industry as me.
And like and not knowing if what you're going through is like normal or like is this just kind of a thing that families go through during this season of time, because like holidays are always really like stressful or summer is really stressful. There's certain periods of the year that are stressful for families, and so for a nanny to just kind of like, oh, we're all going through this like as a nation or like we're all going through this, especially as our industry like kind of evolves and things are changing, to kind of just check in like, oh, is what's going on in my community, is what's going on in my family standard, is that kind of what everybody's going through.
Tell me a little bit about your census that you have put together. And when you get those results, because I know you do it once a year, so tell us a little bit about that. And then I want to know what you do with the feedback and results that you get.
So another part of my like long-winded history story is when I was a behavioral therapist, I really wanted to pursue my PhD in developmental psychology. And so I needed research experience. So I became a research assistant for the Berkeley Early Learning Lab and for an early rehab center in my area. Um, and so I was able to like learn some research skills. And I kind of, when I pursued nannying, kind of put that on the back burner, not really thinking that that was going to be something I pursued anymore. Something I'm totally, totally interested in and love and geek out over. But I kind of thought like that's really on the back burner for now. But then once 2020 hit, once I started creating my Instagram, I was starting to realize that like I didn't have a whole lot of information. Like nannies don't have a whole lot of information. With a lot of us, not a lot of us, but like with it being kind of half and half, with people being paid under the table, with people not being reported, with people kind of working at all of these different things, there wasn't a whole lot of information. And um, I knew that some like associations had done it in the past, but they hadn't been doing it in several years. And so there was just no information. So I just kind of decided to put out a survey in my stories, kind of put out a poll, and then information started coming. And then I was able to kind of make it bigger, make it more extensive, make it more like kind of get into the nitty gritty. This one I'm very, very excited about because I kind of have it was the biggest one I've done. We have over 2,000 participants in this survey, and I had a lot more questions, a lot more details, so we can really kind of get into the nitty gritty of what's going on. And then I'll just kind of turn it into a report and send it out for people to use as a resource. I know a lot of parents, I'm not parents, a lot of nannies in the past have used it in meetings with parents to kind of just like explain like what's going on. Like, this is why I'm asking for this raise. This is why I'm advocating for these benefits because this is what others are receiving. This is what's normal in the market. Like, this is what the market's looking like. I want to make sure that I'm in line with the market. Um, just providing a resource for people to use. And I'm so excited that we were able to reach the 2,000. That was my goal because care.com's cost of care report has 2,000 participants. And so I wanted to kind of have a comparable sample size so that nannies can feel like it's comparable. Like if it's 2,000 that say that it's this rate and 2,000 said it's this rate, it's about like, I don't know.
You can take both data points and well, and the nice thing too about it, and as I think everybody knows, care.com is just a huge organization and there's, it's I think if you go into your area, it's like, and I live in Austin, but it's like if I go into Austin, I'm like, what's the average? And like $13 an hour. It's like, no, it's not. Like, I'm in the industry. No, it's not. Like, it's so bad. But yeah, I think you having done that research and putting that in nanny's hands, and I think that is really amazing that you can provide that for these nannies so that they do have the data to be like, no, 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 this is what it is. Like, believe it or not, this is what it is. These are facts here. So I think that's so great. It's just being such an amazing advocate for nannies. And I have a feeling that this is just like a starting off point for you because as you're realizing, people want this information and need this information. And it's interesting.
Exactly. It's fun. It's fun once we, like, for me personally, to look at the data, it like tells a story of our industry and it tells a story of like what's going on and to see how it's changed over like the last year and to see what the market is looking like now. It's just interesting. And I in this one specifically, I've put quite a few like open-ended spaces for people to kind of write what they're feeling. I have a question specifically about um, like how they've been feeling about the job hunt in the last 6 months, and that one's been really eye-opening for me to just see what the perspective of nannies is, because we all kind of have this understanding that it's a weird time right now. It's not looking super hot. But that's just a feeling that we have. That's kind of just an under like we're like we know, but we don't know. And so to have the like actual data to say like, yeah, most nannies are kind of like struggling right now, or half the nannies are looking for new jobs right now, or like, like those, that's important stuff for us to understand about the story of our industry.
Absolutely. And so this is a good question to ask you. So because I've been doing this forever, I've always had tons of families. I've always had millions of nannies that I talk to, and it's always been a constant flow. And COVID happened. During COVID, I had a ton of families, no nannies. They were gone. I'm like, where are you people? Like, I would send out surveys. I'd be like, are you just staying with your families because of COVID? Are you completely leaving the industry because you're like, I'm not wearing a mask with a 2-year-old? Like, give me a break. And it was just crazy. And then now, and just because you just had mentioned this, the last 6 months, where are the families? Where'd you go? Like, are people not having babies? Like, what is? And there used to be all of these groups too, like, because I'm originally from Chicago, so there'd be the bump club there, and bump club, I would do panel talks all the time. There'd be all these pregnant moms, and they all gathered, and it was amazing. And where are they? Like, literally, I'm having the hardest time, and I have so many nannies right now who are just like the most amazing nannies, and I'm like, you guys, I have 2 families. You need to hang tight a little longer because I'm just wondering the same thing as you are. So, do you have an answer? Because I want an answer.
I don't. I want an answer too because yeah, but that has been a pretty general like consensus from what I've been seeing is like this feeling of like where where'd they go? Like we were kind of on an upswing and now it's where is it? Um, so yeah, it's really been interesting also to kind of just see that across the entire nation. Like it's not just in these like small pockets, it's like all the major cities, all the like, and so it's just been really interesting and especially enlightening for me since I kind of started it post 2020. It's kind of like a real insight into what COVID did here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get that information because I would just be so interested. I would just be very interested to see, what the nanny's perspectives are on why and how and who and what are you going to do. And, because I feel like, COVID ended, let's just say 9 months ago, and nannies came back hot. They were like, and I'll take 35 an hour and I'll take 40 an hour. And I'm like, holy moly, this is like, it's the nanny's world right now. And I'm like, fantastic. If we can get you that, I am happy as can be. Then it started to go down where all the families were like, what? We cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. So on my end, I'm like, okay, well, what about a nanny share? Like you can combine it and you can still have the care of one person and, trying to come up with ways to get everyone to be on the same page in one way or another. And I'm still feeling like it's in this, and my nannies ask me all the time, they're like, why aren't there any families? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. So when you have all that information, I would just be so interested just to see what people say and get an idea of, what people's thoughts are on all of that. Because it was like a huge wave with COVID came in and now we're like, I don't know. We've never done this before.
Yeah, it is. It's a really different landscape. And yeah, it's just interesting to hear from like all perspectives, people from agencies, people from care.com, people from Facebook groups, and they're kind of all experiencing a pretty similar like drought almost. Um, and yeah, I don't know that we've ever had one before. So we're kind of like, how do we as a community navigate a drought?
That's so true. And because I have been in this for 2 decades and I've never seen anything like this. So, and then you think to yourself, as a nanny or an agency owner, anyone really in the industry, it's like, surely it has to come back around, right? Like, I mean, people aren't done having babies forever, you know?
Right. Yeah. You're like, I know plenty of people having them. So
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's going on? Well, I feel like you're a really great resource for all these topics, and I'm excited to see what you have found. And I have no doubt that it's going to grow and grow and grow. And I'm sure so many people look to you as an expert. And I'm just like proud of you for doing that because have been in this industry and you're getting all these answers and talking to all these people, which I think everybody needs because nobody has that kind of community since it's such a singled out type of an industry. So thank you.
thank you. Thank you. That's it makes my heart so happy to just connect people. Like when I just hear about one nanny that's like, I've never had a nanny friend, I've never known another nanny, and then they just get to have another one. Like it's amazing. Like
I was talking to, have you heard of the snacking nanny? Yeah, so I talked to her the other day as one of our nanny interviews, and she was saying the same thing. She was like, I didn't talk to any nannies for like 3 years. And then all of a sudden now I have some nanny friends and it's a completely different world. So I think being able to communicate and have a community built on people that you can talk to and bounce things off of, I think it's awesome.
Way that's not the fear of a lot of families where it's going to turn into gossip or cattiness. It's like we can do it not that way. Like we can create our colleagues and our co-working in a way that is supportive and healthy and full of boundaries. Um, that are, yeah, we can totally do it. We just need to.
Well, I appreciate all the time today, Sarah, and I feel like this was really great, and I will spread it around and make sure that everyone has your information.
This has been a delight.
Same. Well, thank you so much, and I'll reach out soon. Bye.